Chapter 1. The Night Visitor. The rain beat hard against the windows, creating a melancholic melody that filled Roman Nord's office. The detective, with his fedora tilted forward and a cigarette hanging from his lips, gazed at the city through the fog. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, illuminating the deserted street. It was a typical noir night, perfect for a detective immersed in mysteries. As Roman considered closing the office, the door burst open. A tall, elegant woman entered, her presence almost ghostly against the contrast between the streetlight and the office's dimness. Her face was partially hidden by the veil of her hat, but her eyes shone with a mix of fear and determination. "My name is Clara Devereaux," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need your help, Mr. Nord. My husband has been murdered." Roman extinguished his cigarette and stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. He gestured for her to sit, while he picked up a notepad and pen. "Tell me everything, Mrs. Devereaux," he said, his voice deep and calm. Clara sat down and began to speak, her trembling hands clutching her purse. "My husband, Richard, was a renowned businessman. He was found dead in our mansion 3 days ago. The police are lost. They don't know where to start. I need answers, Mr. Nord." Roman watched her intently, absorbing every word. He knew that cases like this always had more beneath the surface. "Describe the crime scene," he requested. Clara took a deep breath before responding. "He was in the office of our house, sitting in the chair, with a look of terror on his face. There was a message written in blood on the wall. They say it was a sudden attack, but nothing seems to make sense." "Blood message?" Roman asked, intrigued. "What did it say?" "Nothing is what it seems," Clara replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm terrified, Mr. Nord. Who could do something like this?" Roman made a few notes, his thoughts racing. "Very well, Mrs. Devereaux. I will start the investigation first thing tomorrow. I will need access to the mansion and to speak with everyone who had contact with your husband." Clara nodded, hope lighting up her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Nord. I trust that you will find the truth." As she rose to leave, Roman leaned back in his chair, contemplating the case. He knew that the truth would be hard to find, buried under layers of lies and secrets. But he was determined. This was what he did best. Chapter 2. The Crime Scene. The following morning brought a light mist, wrapping the city in a gray shroud. Roman Nord drove to the Devereaux mansion, an imposing Victorian structure perched atop a hill. The wrought iron gate creaked open, and Roman followed the shaded driveway to the main entrance. Clara was waiting at the door, her expression reflecting a mixture of anxiety and sadness. "Good morning, Mr. Nord. Thank you for coming so quickly." Roman nodded, removing his hat as he entered. "Let's get straight to it, Mrs. Devereaux. Show me the location." She guided him through the luxuriously decorated corridors of the mansion, passing by antique paintings and polished mahogany furniture. The silence of the house was almost palpable, as if the building itself were in mourning. Finally, they reached Richard Devereaux's office. Clara hesitated for a moment before opening the door. The office was large and well lit, with tall windows, allowing the faint morning light to filter in. At the center of the room, an imposing oak desk was partially covered with papers. Roman walked slowly, absorbing every detail. The red velvet curtains were slightly open, letting the outside mist seep into the atmosphere. On the leather chair behind the desk, there was a dark stain where Richard had been found. Roman approached, observing the mark carefully. Clara spoke in an almost inaudible whisper. "They took the body yesterday, but I couldn't clean it. It feels wrong." Roman nodded, understanding. He crouched to examine the area around the chair. Small fragments of glass were scattered on the floor, possibly from a broken glass. On the floor, next to the chair, there was a framed photo of Richard and Clara at a charity event. It was cracked, as if it had been thrown to the ground with force. The message on the wall, written in Richard's blood, was undeniably disturbing. "Nothing is what it seems," it read in large, uneven letters. Roman stepped closer to examine it, The blood was already dry, forming a dark crust against the cream-colored paint. He wondered if the message was a warning or a taunt. Roman opened the desk drawers, searching for anything that might be relevant. In one of them, he found a partially burned letter. The words were difficult to read, but he managed to make out fragments like threat and pay dearly. He placed the letter in a plastic bag for further examination later. "Did he have enemies?" Roman asked, turning to Clara. She hesitated before responding. "Richard was a powerful businessman. He made many enemies over the years, but no one I know would be capable of something like this." Roman continued his search, moving to the bookshelf. Many volumes were classics of literature, but there was a section dedicated to books on finance and business strategies. In one of the books, he found an old newspaper clipping about a financial scandal involving Richard's company. "This is interesting," he murmured to himself. Clara's doubts and anxieties were palpable as she watched the detective work. Roman knew there was much more to discover, but each detail was beginning to form a clearer picture. As he left the office, Roman found himself thinking about the bloodied message. He had a feeling that this case would lead him to dark and unexpected places. The path to the truth was just beginning, and Roman was ready to follow it no matter where it led. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Roman Nord, with his sharp mind and keen eyes, began his investigation with a list of names provided by Clara Devereaux. She had mentioned some of Richard's key associates, as well as close family and friends. Any of them could hold a clue, some detail that could help unravel the mystery of the murder. First on the list was Victor Lansing, Richard's longtime business partner. Victor was a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor and an impeccable reputation in the business world. Roman arranged a meeting with him at his luxurious downtown office. The interrogation of Victor Lansing. Victor's office was a stark contrast to the somber scene of the Devereaux mansion. It was modern, with clean lines and minimalist decor. Victor greeted him with a firm handshake, but his cold eyes revealed little. "Sit down, Mr. Nord," said Victor, gesturing to a leather chair. "I was surprised when I heard you were investigating Richard's death. It was a horrible tragedy." Roman settled into the chair, closely observing the man before him. "Mr. Lansing, I need to know more about the business relationship between you and Richard. Could anything recent have caused tension between you?" Victor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Richard and I had been partners for many years. As with any business, we had our differences, but we always resolved them professionally. Recently, however, Richard had been acting strangely. He seemed worried, but wouldn't tell me why." "Worried about what?" Roman pressed. "He mentioned some threats, but never gave details. I thought it was just paranoia. Richard had many enemies in the business world, but he was always able to handle them." Roman mentally noted Victor's words. "Do you know of anyone specific who might have had a motive to kill him?" Victor shook his head. "No one I can point to with certainty, but, as I said, the business world is full of rivalries. Anyone could have a motive." The interrogation of Helena Devereaux. Leaving Victor's office, Roman headed to the home of Helena Devereaux, Richard's younger sister. She lived in a charming apartment in the city's artistic district. Upon arrival, he was greeted by a delicate-looking young woman, but with eyes that betrayed an inner strength. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Nord," said Helena, serving him a cup of tea. "Richard meant everything to me. I can't understand why someone would do this." Roman accepted the tea, but kept his senses alert. "Helena, I need to know if your brother had any recent issues, anything that might have led to this tragedy." Helena looked at the floor, thoughtful. "He was different in the last few months, more distant, as if he were carrying a great burden. I asked him, but he always avoided the conversation. He only mentioned that he was involved in something big, something that could change everything." "Do you know what this something big was?" Roman asked, leaning forward. She shook her head. "No. Richard was very secretive when it came to business, but I'm sure someone knew. Maybe one of his colleagues or his lover. Roman raised his eyebrows. Lover? Helena nodded. I don't know who she is, but I heard rumors. Richard was seeing someone in secret. Maybe she knows more. Roman noted this new information. Do you have any idea where I might start looking for this person? Helena thought for a moment. I heard him mention a jazz club downtown. He used to go there often. Maybe you can find something there. The jazz club. Later that evening, Roman headed to the jazz club, a place called Night Notes. It was an elegant venue with soft lighting and live music that filled the atmosphere with a sense of nostalgia. He sat at the bar, observing the people around him. Can I help you, sir? Asked the bartender, a burly man with a thick beard. I'm looking for information about Richard Devereaux, said Roman, showing his ID. Did he used to come here? The bartender looked at the photo and slowly nodded. Yes, Richard was a regular. He always came with a woman. Never got her name, but they seemed quite close. Do you know if she still comes here? Roman asked, hopeful. Sometimes, the bartender replied. But she's always discreet. You might get lucky and find her tonight. Roman thanked him and settled in, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. The night was just beginning, and he knew that each clue would bring him closer to the truth. Chapter 4. Secrets and Jazz. The atmosphere of Night Notes was thick with cigarette smoke and the soft murmur of conversations drowned by the music. Roman Nord, with his fedora tilted forward, observed every detail of the jazz club, his keen eyes searching for any sign of Richard Devereaux's mysterious lover. As the band played a melancholic melody, an elegant woman entered the club. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled in waves, and she wore a black dress that shimmered under the club's soft lights. She moved to a table in the corner, almost hiding herself in the shadows. Roman felt she could be the missing piece. He stood up and, with calculated steps, approached her table. "Good evening," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "May I sit down?" She looked at him, her blue eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Depends on who's asking," she replied, her voice soft and controlled. "Roman Nord," he said, showing his identification. "I'm investigating the death of Richard Devereaux. I believe you can help me." Her expression changed slightly, a flicker of sadness passing through her eyes. "My name is Evelyn Sinclair," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I was close to Richard." Roman settled into the chair, leaning slightly forward. "I need to know more about your relationship. Anything he told you recently could be crucial to the investigation." Evelyn sighed, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Richard was worried. He talked about threats but never gave details. He said he was involved in something dangerous that could put both of us at risk. "Do you know what it was?" Roman asked, his eyes never leaving hers. She shook her head. He was very secretive about the details, but he mentioned a name several times, a man named Victor Lansing. They had a complicated business relationship. Roman made a mental note. Victor Lansing. Did he mention anything specific about Victor? Richard thought Victor was conspiring against him, Evelyn said quietly, but he never told me why. He just said I should be careful and stay away from Victor. Roman considered this new information. "Evelyn, do you have any idea who else might want to harm Richard?" She hesitated before answering. Richard had many enemies, but Victor always seemed the most dangerous. Besides, I heard rumors that Richard was involved in some shady deals, things that could easily earn him deadly enemies. Roman thanked Evelyn for the information and handed her his card. "If you remember anything else, don't hesitate to call me." As he stood up to leave, Evelyn grabbed his arm. "Be careful, Mr. Nord. The people you're dealing with are dangerous. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of this." Roman nodded, his face serious. "Thank you for the warning, Evelyn. I'll be careful." The night visit. Back at his office, Roman organized the information he had gathered. The picture was starting to take shape, But there were still many missing pieces. He needed more evidence, something concrete that linked Victor Lansing to Richard's murder. While reflecting, the phone rang. "Nord," he answered, his voice firm. "Mr. Nord, this is Helena Devereaux," said a trembling voice on the other end of the line. "I found something in Richard's office that I think you should see. Can you come here now?" Roman quickly agreed, and within minutes, he was at the Devereaux mansion. Helena led him back to the office, where she handed him a sealed envelope. "I found this hidden in the secret drawer of Richard's desk." Roman carefully opened the envelope. Inside were documents detailing suspicious financial transactions and Richard's diary. The diary entries revealed Richard's growing paranoia about Victor and other obscure threats. "This could be exactly what I needed," Roman said, thanking Helena. "I'll investigate these leads." With the new information in hand, Roman knew he was getting closer to the truth. But he also knew he was stepping into dangerous territory where any misstep could be fatal. Chapter 5. Webs of Deceit. Roman Nord felt the weight of the documents in his briefcase as he left the Devereaux mansion. Richard's diary and the suspicious financial transactions could be the key to unraveling the mystery, but they also meant he was getting closer to real danger. He drove back to his office, where he planned to study the new evidence in detail. Studying the evidence, seated in his leather chair, Roman opened Richard's diary. The pages were filled with chaotic notes, reflecting the troubled mind of a man who felt increasingly cornered. Richard mentioned clandestine meetings, shady negotiations, and a growing sense of being watched. One entry in particular caught Roman's attention. June 23rd. "Victor is becoming a bigger threat than I imagined. He knows too much about my illegal dealings. I need to find a way to neutralize him before it's too late." Roman flipped through the financial documents. The transactions showed a complex web of offshore accounts and large sums of money moving around. Victor Lansing seemed to be at the center of many of these transactions, but there were other names Roman didn't recognize yet. He made a list of the names and decided he needed more information on each of them. Among the names were figures from the criminal underworld and businessmen known for their dubious practices. A night in the underworld. As night fell, Roman headed to one of the city's seediest bars, where he hoped to find one of his informants, a snitch known as Eddie Ratz. The bar, lit only by dim lights and enveloped in a haze of smoke, was the kind of place where secrets were traded for money. Eddie was sitting at a table in the back, his nervous gaze sweeping the room. When he saw Roman, he nodded discreetly. "Detective Nord," he said in a raspy whisper, "you're getting yourself into something big this time." Roman sat down, keeping his voice low. "I need information on Victor Lansing and some other names. They're all linked to suspicious financial transactions." Eddie frowned, glancing around before responding. "Victor's a shark, always mixed up in dirty deals. He's tied to drug trafficking, money laundering, and who knows what else. As for the other names, they're thugs and business partners. If you're messing with them, you need to be careful." Roman handed Eddie the list of names. "Can you get more information on these guys?" Eddie nodded. "I'll see what I can find. But Nord, watch your back with Victor. He's got eyes and ears all over the city. If he thinks you're onto him, he'll try to shut you up." Confronting Victor. The next day, Roman decided to confront Victor Lansing directly. He knew it could be dangerous, but he needed to see Victor's reaction to the implied accusations. He arranged a meeting at Victor's office, hoping for a revealing conversation. Victor greeted him with a cold smile. "Detective Nord, to what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" Roman kept his gaze steady. "Mr. Lansing, I found some disturbing evidence linking you to illegal activities and possibly to the murder of Richard Devereaux. I'd like to hear your side of the story." Victor's smile disappeared, replaced by a calculating expression. "Be careful what you're implying, Nord. Richard was a friend and business partner. It's true we had our differences, but I would never harm him." Roman watched Victor closely, looking for any sign of nervousness. What about the financial transactions? Documents indicating you were involved in illegal schemes. Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze darkening. Business is complex, Detective. Sometimes we have to tread the fine line between legal and illegal, but none of that means I killed Richard. Maybe not, Roman said, standing up. But until I have all the answers, I'll keep investigating, and if I find out you're involved, you'll be the first to know. As he left Victor's office, Roman felt he was getting closer to the truth, but he also knew he was approaching deadly danger. He needed to act quickly and cautiously. Chapter 6: False Leads and Hidden Truths. Roman Nord knew that the tension between him and Victor Lansing had reached a critical point. The conversation with Victor had made it clear that the businessman was a dangerous man with many secrets. Back at his office, Roman began assembling a board with all the information he had so far, trying to connect the pieces of this deadly puzzle. New discoveries. As he analyzed the financial documents, Roman noticed something he had overlooked before: a series of small but regular transactions to an unknown account. He decided to follow this new lead, hoping it would provide more answers. He contacted an old friend, Paul, a specialist in financial crimes. Paul was a genius at tracing obscure transactions and had a knack for uncovering what others wanted to hide. "Roman, this is interesting," Paul said, looking at the documents. "These transactions look like payments to an informant or someone working in the shadows. The account is registered under a shell company." Roman leaned forward, intrigued. "Can you find out who's behind this company?" Paul smiled, his fingers already flying over the keyboard. "Give me a few minutes." The trap. While Paul worked, Roman decided to check out another lead. Evelyn Sinclair had mentioned a name that was on his list: Robert "Bobby" Marcos, a known criminal with deep connections in the underworld. Roman knew he needed to talk to Bobby, but he also knew that meeting him would be dangerous. Roman found Bobby in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place was dark and damp, smelling of rust and old oil. Bobby, a burly man with a scar on his face, was sitting on a crate, smoking a cigar. "Detective Nord," Bobby said, his deep voice echoing through the warehouse. "What do you want with me?" Roman remained calm despite the intimidating environment. "I need information about Victor Lansing. I heard you have some connections with him." Bobby laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Victor? He's a big fish. It's not wise to mess with him." "I'm not here to play games, Bobby. If you know something that can help clarify Richard Devereaux's death, you'd better speak now." Bobby narrowed his eyes, studying Roman. "Richard was getting into things he shouldn't. Victor always had a hand in dirty deals, but Richard wanted out. He was trying to blackmail Victor, and you know how that ends." Roman made a mental note. Blackmail? With what? Documents, evidence. Richard had a dossier on Victor, but he underestimated how dangerous Victor can be. Before Bobby could say more, the headlights of a car lit up the warehouse. Roman knew immediately they were in trouble. He ducked, pulling Bobby with him as gunfire echoed through the warehouse, ricocheting off the metal walls. Hasty escape. Roman and Bobby ran for the back exit, bullets still whizzing around them. They managed to hide behind a pile of boxes as the car drove away. "You need to get out of here, Nord," Bobby said, panting. "They'll be back. Victor knows you're on his trail." Roman nodded, aware of the growing danger. "Thanks for the information, Bobby. Take care." The final connection. With the new information, Roman felt he was getting closer to the end of this enigma. Henry Ross was a known name in Victor's circle, but until now, no one knew how deeply he was involved. Roman knew he needed to confront Henry and uncover the whole truth. As night fell over the city, Roman prepared for another dangerous confrontation. He knew he was close to solving the case, but he also knew he was getting closer to a fatal showdown with Victor Lansing and his cronies. With each step he took, he felt the shadow of death closing in. Chapter 7. The net closes night shrouded the city in dense darkness as Roman Nord prepared for the decisive confrontation. He knew that every step he took brought him not only closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. Henry Ross, Victor Lansing's lawyer, was the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Richard Devereaux's death. The meeting with Henry Ross Roman arranged to meet Henry Ross at a discreet cafe in the city center. It was a busy enough place to ensure some safety, yet isolated enough for a serious conversation. Ross was an elegant man with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He arrived punctually, dressed in an impeccable suit. "Detective Nord," Ross said, sitting down with a slight nod. "What can I do for you?" Roman observed the man before him. "Mr. Ross, I'm investigating Richard Devereaux's murder. Your name appears in some suspicious transactions. I need answers." Ross maintained his composure, but Roman noticed a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Suspicious transactions? That's a serious accusation, Detective. I've always kept my business within the law." Roman leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Ross's. "Then you won't mind telling me what you know about Victor Lansing's dealings, especially his connections with Richard Devereaux." Ross hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. "Victor is a complicated man. He and Richard had a business relationship that went beyond the bounds of legality. Richard was trying to get out, and that didn't sit well with Victor." "Getting out of what exactly?" Roman pressed. "Money laundering, information trafficking." Richard wanted to expose Victor and used incriminating documents as leverage, but he underestimated how far Victor would go to protect his interests. Roman was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. "Did you know about the threats to Richard?" Ross nodded slowly. "Yes, I tried to warn him, but he was determined to get out. He believed he could escape unscathed." "So Victor had him killed?" Roman asked directly. Ross looked around nervously before answering. "I have no direct proof, but all signs point to that. Victor has the means and the motive." Roman's plan. After parting ways with Ross, Roman felt ready to act. He had enough evidence to confront Victor, but knew he needed support. He called Clara Devereaux, informing her of his findings and asking her to be ready for anything. "I'm going after Victor," Roman said, "but I need you to be safe and prepared to cooperate with the police once I have enough to arrest him." Clara agreed, her voice firm despite the situation. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mr. Nord. Just end this." Roman then contacted the police, briefing them on the situation and requesting backup for the operation he was planning. He knew he needed concrete proof and, above all, needed to catch Victor red-handed. The final confrontation. Roman set a trap for Victor, using Ross's information to lure the businessman to an isolated location under the pretext of an urgent negotiation. He chose an abandoned warehouse, a place where he could control the situation. Victor arrived punctually, as expected. He was accompanied by two henchmen, burly men with hard expressions. Roman was hidden in the shadows, observing every move. "Detective Nord," Victor called out loudly, looking around. "I know you're here. Let's end this once and for all." Roman stepped out of the shadows, maintaining a confident posture. "Victor Lansing, you're surrounded. I have enough evidence to arrest you for the murder of Richard Devereaux and your other crimes." Victor laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Evidence? You think you'll arrest me based on words? My men are here, and you're alone." At that moment, police sirens began to wail in the distance, drawing closer. Victor looked around, realizing the trap. "You've played this well, Nord." "It was the only way to end this," Roman replied, taking a step forward. "Surrender, Victor. There's nowhere to run." Victor's henchman hesitated, seeing the approaching police. Victor, however, pulled out a gun, pointing it at Roman. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me." The fight Roman reacted quickly, dodging as Victor fired. He lunged at the businessman, landing a direct punch to his face. Victor's gun fell to the ground with the impact, but he wasn't willing to surrender easily. The two men entered a fierce struggle, exchanging punches and kicks on the cold, dirty floor of the warehouse. Victor managed to headbutt Roman, making him stagger backward. Taking advantage of the moment, he got up and ran towards the exit, his henchmen trying to cover him. Roman regained his balance, in time to see Victor escaping. "Not so fast, Lansing!" Roman shouted, giving chase. Victor ran to the car parked outside the warehouse and got in, starting the engine quickly. Roman reached his own car, a sturdy black sedan, and sped after Victor. The chase. The chase through the dark city streets was intense. Victor drove like a madman, trying to lose Roman at every turn. Tires screeched, and parked cars swayed with the rush of speed. Roman kept steady, his eyes fixed on the taillights of Victor's car. The two cars turned onto a secondary road, away from the city center. Victor tried to widen the gap between them, but Roman was a skilled driver and knew every shortcut. "You won't escape, Victor," Roman muttered, gripping the wheel. The winding road led them to an old, poorly lit bridge. Victor accelerated, but Roman was right behind. He knew he needed a plan to capture Victor before anyone else got hurt. The capture. As they neared the middle of the bridge, Roman saw his opportunity. He sped up, pulling alongside Victor's car. With a quick maneuver, he forced Victor's car to swerve and stop. Victor tried to run, but Roman was faster. He tackled Victor to the ground, pinning him down as the police arrived. "It's over, Victor," Roman said, handcuffing him. "You're under arrest." Victor struggled, but it was no use. The police quickly took him into custody, and Roman felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, the web of deceit had been untangled. Richard Devereaux's murder was solved, and Victor Lansing's reign of terror was over. As the dawn began to break, Roman knew he had brought justice to those who had been wronged. Chapter 8. The Fatal Blockade. The chase through the dark city streets continued fiercely. Roman Nord followed Victor Lansing closely, every turn and every acceleration keeping the tension high. The city lights faded as they approached an old, poorly lit bridge. Roman knew he had to act quickly to stop Victor from escaping. The decisive phone call. As the two cars crossed the bridge, Roman picked up his phone and called the chief of police. "It's Nord. I'm chasing Victor Lansing. He's heading towards Jacare Street. We need a blockade immediately." "Got it, Nord," the chief replied. "We'll fill the street with officers and set up a blockade. Be careful." Roman put away the phone and stayed focused on the chase. Jacare Street was a narrow, winding road, surrounded by abandoned buildings and dead-end alleys. It was the perfect place to set a trap. The trap closes. Victor drove like a man possessed, trying to gain distance from Roman. He didn't know the police were already setting up the blockade ahead. Roman increased his speed, staying close to Victor's car, guiding him straight into the trap. As they entered Jacare Street, the red and blue lights of police cars illuminated the way. Victor saw the blockade too late. He tried to swerve, but the speed and panic prevented him from reacting in time. His tires blew out as they hit the police spike strips, causing the vehicle to skid violently. "No, no, no!" Victor shouted, trying to control the runaway car. Roman watched as Victor's car spun out of control, the tires sparking on the asphalt. The car slid, spun, and finally crashed head-on into a concrete wall. The impact was brutal, crumpling the front of the vehicle and slamming Victor against the steering wheel. Roman stopped his car abruptly, quickly getting out and running towards Victor's wrecked car. The police approached, guns drawn, but Roman gestured for them to stay back. He pried open the driver's door, which was dented and hard to move. Victor was unconscious, his face covered in blood. Roman checked his pulse, feeling a faint beat. "Call an ambulance," he shouted to the officers. The end of Victor Lansing. The ambulance arrived quickly, but Roman knew Victor's chances of survival were slim. He stood by the businessman as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. Victor opened his eyes for a moment, looking at Roman with a mix of hatred and resignation. "You can't get me," Victor whispered, his voice weak. Roman shook his head. "I already have, Victor. It's over." Victor closed his eyes and took his last breath as life slipped away. Roman stood up, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The man who had caused so much chaos and suffering was dead, but justice had been served. Reflection. As the police cleared the scene and the paramedics took Victor's body away, Roman reflected on everything that had happened. He knew that despite the tragic end, he had brought some peace to Victor's victims, including Clara Devereaux. The case was closed, but the scars would remain. Roman returned to his car, tired but determined. He knew there would always be more mysteries to solve, more injustices to correct. But for now, he could rest, satisfied with a job well done.